Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is May 3rd, Wednesday, May 3rd, to be precise, 2023. To put an even finer point on it, hell, it's 9:01 and 40 seconds, if it matters to you, and you're in the Eastern Time Zone. Time for another show. That's about the time that we begin on these things. Everything seems to be A-okay, so here we go. Fingers crossed for high schooler making the bus. The usual morning confusion. And, all right, just a little bit of a cough as well. All right, so here's where we stand. Everything is all effed up, and we'll straighten it out the best we can. Uh-oh, I see the name Gates is trending on the Bird site, which I was just on my way to monitor for the KITM hashtag, and nothing else, because I try not to read the place. But from time to time, okay, things slip up. I'm looking for things to cover on the show. And, it's a pretty good source for that. All right, let's see. What other fun things have we to do? Oh, hey, John Shiflett tooting out this morning that we're on the air and ready to go. And look, there's some information here. Is it World Press Freedom Day? That's nice. Congratulations to the world and its press, at least those which enjoy freedom. And not everybody does. So, okay. There's a little bit of information provided, as a matter of fact. UNESCO has a proclamation, perhaps, for the day. World Press Freedom Day. May 3rd acts as a reminder, or in fact, the initial information for some of us, to governments of the need to respect their commitment to press freedom, where they have such a commitment. And then I guess if they don't, they should go and get one at the Commitment to Press Freedom store, I suppose. And it's a reminder for them to celebrate the fundamental principles of press freedom, assess the state of press freedom throughout the world, defend the media from attacks on their independence, and pay tribute to journalists who have lost their lives in the line of duty. So some very serious messaging behind it, of course, as well. It's not World Press Frivolity Day. It's World Press Freedom Day. Okay. So, all right, there you have it. That's an unexpected start to the day, but a good idea, just to remind everybody what's on the calendar today, now that I have a much lamer refrigerator calendar. The famed NAFTA refrigerator calendar that had all sorts of fun dates and holidays marked on it has gone by the wayside, and I guess we got a different brand this year, and it's just not living up to the hype. Okay. Plenty of other things on tap, of course, things put away in pocket, some of which are super cool and interesting, others of which are, I don't know what, boring, but we have to cover anyway. All right. Anyway, I didn't finish reading yesterday, but I don't know if we'll go back to it necessarily, because I think the point was largely made, but I've been thinking, I thought all day, all afternoon anyway, about Evan Corin's piece in his Substack that he sent that for the first time, I think, really connected a lot of dots in terms of at least one plausible explanation as to why it was that, say, Steve Bannon, he didn't even write about this part, but why Steve Bannon might have believed that there was real potential in converting online gaming communities to actual right-wing activists. And I think the missing link here was the fact that this one particular very prominent and much revered online gamer was among the victims murdered at Benghazi, and that there was this large, probably otherwise politically disengaged community. Although he did point out that a lot of them were interested in or professionally working for the U.S. government in national security areas, although they were presumably already kind of clued in to what was going on in the world politically, and either were more attuned to it already or had decided that they didn't want to be attuned to it no matter what happened. But other people saw a gaming colleague killed at Benghazi and without any further guidance on exactly what happened and what you should be thinking, what the actual facts of the situation were, I guess started to look for someone to blame, and Hillary Clinton was presented to them as the correct target for that blame. And I don't know. I do wonder why members of the United States national security and governmental apparatus who happen to be online gamers, if they saw this develop and disagreed, why they didn't step in and correct their colleagues. But, maybe they did and it was just no avail. Maybe some of them believed it too. But what an interesting nexus between the development of these communities and the very strange development of this QAnon type community. QAnon, I guess the greater QAnon community, but taking cues for their politics from online discussion. That's not by itself unique and interesting. That was happening anyway. But it made no sense to me at the time when I read the story why Steve Bannon had so much faith that online gaming communities could be converted to his particular brand of politics. I would have thought, if anything, they would have been converted to a sort of a laissez-faire libertarian politics of pretty much leave me alone and don't involve me in your garbage. I just want to play my game. So that helped explain some things. I don't know whether it's true, as Joan pointed out. All I have done here is read it on the internet, and that's not by itself going to convince me. But I thought it was a insightful piece, and maybe rings true for some of you too. Maybe one of you for whom it rings true would be Greg Dworkin. I don't know, but we have other things to get to which do ring true, which he's collected because they are true. Good morning, Greg. How are you doing?
Good morning. So that's pretty esoteric and therefore just right in line with the kind of stuff we're interested in.
Excellent. It's as if I had planned it or knew what the hell we were doing.
Speaking of which, I'll give you your door number 1, door number 2, and door number 3. Let's make a deal choices this morning.
Okay.
Do you want to start with the debt limit, which is pretty esoteric and normies aren't paying attention to that? You want to talk about a brief tour of media and how they're dealing with things these days?
Ooh,
or
yes,
do you want to talk about the fine points of discovery and how DeSantis and Disney have gotten themselves in a swamp?
Man, all of them. But I don't know.
All of them. Which one do you want to do first?
All right. Well, let's do the debt limit. That's esoteric but important and looming. Okay.
All right. Let's do the debt limit because that is actually pretty esoteric, and that will lead into some media stuff as it turns out.
All right. Then.
So my pundit roundup this morning is titled "The D.C. Struggle to Understand Democratic Resolve on the Debt Ceiling."
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting situation where Republicans, who at the time, was this 2011, something like that? I can't even remember when it was. It was so long ago. The young guns, Kevin McCarthy, Eric Cantor,
other guys,
were really
Paul Ryan,
even Jim Jordan.
Oh,
they were agitating to, block with Newt Gingrich the government from funding anything, and they almost wanted a default.
Okay.
This was in the Obama years.
Okay. 2011 was an Obama
They looked at what Gingrich did, and they said, let's do a Gingrich-style attack on the government. And Obama negotiated with them, and it got resolved.
What? Okay.
With John Boehner's help. And so two sides, learned some lessons from that. The Democrats learned never to negotiate with terrorists.
Oh, all right.
And the Republicans who lost that struggle were steaming and wanted revenge. And now they get it. At least they think they get it. So now you have two sides who each think they're going to win, and only one side is right.
All right.
So this is a political playbook this morning. No one's blinking on the debt limit anytime soon. Well, duh.
Blink, blink.
A fundamental clash of perspectives is driving the impasse, they write. For Speaker Kevin McCarthy and fellow House Republicans, the ball is in Biden and Democrats' court after uniting around a GOP debt ceiling proposal last week. It's on them, in their view, to come down off their clean hike demands and negotiate. But Democrats are still convinced they have the upper hand, believing that it's McCarthy who has to come off his position. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer yesterday insisted Republicans had to start bargaining down from the House-passed proposal, which trades a year-long debt limit hike with deep spending cuts and the reversal of key Biden initiatives. That's not a plan, Schumer said when asked about the House proposal. It's a hard right-wing wish list that everybody knows has no chance of passing.
Okay.
So they don't know what to do. In the House, Politico writes, Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries revealed yesterday a quietly filled shell bill could in theory be used to make an end run about McCarthy with a discharge petition. That is to say, they have one sitting there and they can add, get rid of the debt limit. The problem, there aren't the votes to discharge anything. In other words, you have to get Republicans to sign on to it. But at least there's a vehicle that's sitting there. So the idea that, well, you can't do a discharge position because it's too late. Well, actually, there's a shell law proposed law that actually would allow that. The problem isn't the timing, it's the votes. You need votes. Now, you can't really decide votes now because these are the kinds of things where Republicans would only get cold feet at the last minute. But that's a possibility. Meanwhile, at the White House, New York Times' Jim Tankersley reports that aides continue to explore whether the administration can unilaterally continue paying the nation's bills even if Congress refuses to act. To me, that's how it ends. Because, part of this whole problem isn't just a problem with Republicans, although it is a problem with Republicans. Because Republican sourcing drives so much of D.C. and media commentary, they've infused the media with the idea that Democrats always cave, and we just don't understand why Biden isn't negotiating because that's the Republican position, and why isn't he agreeing? And in fact, they skipped the part about Biden learning his lesson about not negotiating with terrorists, and that he means it, and they haven't wrapped their heads around it. And only this morning, yesterday, the New York Times had a piece, is the debt limit constitutional? Biden aides are debating it. And then this morning, this Politico piece that I'm reading to you, and only now is it dawning on them that, hey, maybe Biden isn't going to cave, at least not right away, not that easily. Which is progress in a way. Yes.
I suppose so. We'll have to take it.
Progress with the media. It's not progress with resolving the debt limit.
No, right. But that's something. That's how a lot of these things get resolved. If the Republicans are reading in the newspaper that they face the wrong problem, they're going to go about life incorrectly. And they do that frequently.
Yeah, well, they don't listen.
Yeah.
So
even
they
if
don't
you tell
want
them the right lesson,
that's what I'm trying to
listen.
say. The problem for McCarthy is that his conference, what we Democrats might call our caucus, his conference doesn't want resolution. That's why Biden has to act unilaterally.
This is an interesting situation. I know people are bored sometimes by the debt limit, but something like, historical and constitutional landmark is going to happen here unless Republicans just say, screw it, forget the whole thing. So it's going to be interesting. Something that was never considered within the realm of possibility before, except, by people like us who read articles that theorize about this stuff. It's going to happen.
Right. So
watch it.
Mitch McConnell says, I'm not saving McCarthy.
That's
it's up to them to negotiate. But again, it's too early in the process for them to admit what the end game is yet. And so, Biden isn't saying I'll mint $1 trillion coin. And Mitch McConnell isn't saying I will help to persuade Kevin McCarthy. And Kevin McCarthy isn't saying we have to figure out an off-ramp because my people won't cave, so you have to save me from myself. And that's where the discharge petition comes in. But McCarthy basically is screwed because basically he's either going to tank the U.S. economy or he's not going to be speaker, and he has to choose which one it is.
It could be both.
I say, why not both?
Yeah, right. Give it a try.
Right. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. And then as part and parcel of that, in terms of where that leads, David Rothkopf has an interesting piece this morning in the Daily Beast, how Bidenomics has finally defeated Reaganomics. Basically, Biden's infrastructure bill and everything else about it is funding the middle class rather than the trickle-down nonsense. Huckster brew, he calls it.
All right.
grift
Cool.
of the Laffer curve and Reagan, which is give the money to the industries and it'll trickle down to real people.
Yeah, sure. They'll always pass the savings on to consumers.
I didn't do that, whether it's the American Rescue Plan, the Infrastructure Plan, whatever he did, Chips and Science Act, none of it, it was immediately give it to industry. Chips and Science Act probably comes closest, but there's a lot in there about infrastructure and building, other things that is part and parcel of what David Rothkopf is talking about.
Okay.
Last week in Washington, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan delivered a speech at the Brookings Institution, wasn't the Heritage Foundation, that helped tie together many of the core principles underlying Biden's views and actions. It was certainly the most significant economic speech ever given by a U.S. National Security Advisor. But then again, it was clear even before he arrived in office that Sullivan would become the most economically savvy and active national security advisor in U.S. history. That's David Rothkopf's bailiwick. That's his ballpark there, is the national security and foreign relations area. Work he has been actively involved in, like the Carnegie Endowment's initiative on making U.S. foreign policy work better for the middle class, was quickly seen to translate into action. Sullivan also wrote on related subjects, including on the fact that foreign policy and economic policy were deeply intertwined. America needs a new economic philosophy. Foreign policy experts can help, he wrote. For Foreign Policy in 2020 with Jennifer Harris. Sullivan's speech began with the assertion that because many of the economic policies of the past were not serving most Americans, which is to say Reaganomics, that this moment demands we forge a new consensus, something he described as a modern industrial and innovation strategy. Invest in the source of our own economic and technological strength. From the outset, and you can see where the CHIPS Act falls into that, Sullivan's speech went on to explain that from the outset, Biden and his team saw the country as facing four fundamental challenges, including hollowing out of the U.S. industrial base, and took a clear shot at Reaganomics when he noted that the vision of public investment that energized the American project had faded, giving way to a set of ideas that championed tax cutting and deregulation. And going further, he argued it's a core mistake of these recent past policies that they are based on the deeply flawed idea that marketers always allocate capital productivity efficiently.
Oh, whoops.
See Silicon
I feel
Valley
like we
Bank.
taught everybody this. Well, yeah, okay, good. That's a thoughtful recognition. I had no idea that they were working on it this way, though.
Well, that's the thing. It's one of those quiet things that when it comes election time, they'll have to publicize. On the other hand, part of the problem with this really good stuff that President Biden does, that maybe 20-somethings don't like him for because he's 80, will take some 25 years to really reach its peak effect, and yet it's going to affect the 20-year-olds,
yes,
not the 80-year-olds who will be long gone when the best benefits happen. So he's got to sell that. That's
a tough sell.
They
might want to find a
but
different
it's also true.
Path. Yes. Well, so what? It's true. Oh,
exactly
no.
Right.
Well, everybody has to
so
listen now, huh?
Kinsley Gaff, eh? The climate crisis was the third of the four challenges, and critically at the core of Biden's ideas was inequality and its damage to democracy. And in this instance, Jake Sullivan, cites the core elements of Reaganomics, such as trickle-down economic policy like regressive tax cuts, deep cuts to public investment, unchecked corporate concentration, and active measures to undermine unions. Sullivan mentioned that in his speech. The third step, especially welcome to me, which is David Rothkopf, as a former trade official, is a moving beyond traditional trade deals to innovative new international economic partnerships focused at the core challenges of our time. And the final point is the administration's effort to protect the foundational technologies with a small yard and a high fence.
Okay.
Right? Subtext here is China, keeping the country from gaining advantages in key technologies, and that's why you block chip sales.
Okay.
So that's the philosophy. That's the
wide
plan.
range.
And it's all part and parcel of that. Now, go back to what the House is doing. If they get what they want in terms of their demands, which are ridiculous, it's basically cut everything for the middle class, go back to Reaganomics, give tax breaks to the big companies, cross your fingers and hope it works, and it will work for them because they'll get lots of campaign contributions, and therefore job done, over, let's move on to something else.
Right. Okay, so it's easy to see how they would mistake that for success.
Sure, absolutely. Just like mistaking, we passed a bill that Kevin McCarthy had to write because we demanded that he did, and that's a win. A win for who?
Yeah.
It's a win for Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's not a win for McCarthy, and it's not a win for the country. But again, that's too nuanced and complicated for the press to figure. So they say, oh, look how McCarthy pulled it together to get this one vote win, just like he did when he became Speaker. Yes, but he's just as weak as when he became Speaker. You're missing the point there, really.
Well, right. I mean, they don't really know what else to say. Traditionally, when a bill passes the House, that is an accomplishment for the leadership, because normally that's the way it works. The leadership says these are the bills that we need to pass, and the shapes, the contours of that bill as well, and people come around to that.
Like their border bill, which is still languishing because it hasn't passed yet.
Yeah. So instead here we have the rank and file saying you need to hang all these things on a must-pass Christmas tree, and the leadership unable
Messaging
to
bill.
say no.
Even they know it's a messaging bill. But
So-
what they're saying is, yes, but
It's
it
a new
gives
construct
McCarthy
for
a
them,
stronger hand to negotiate. Well, what if the other side
With who?
isn't in the least bit interested in negotiating?
Right. Well, that's true.
Well,
I mean, yeah. What kind of hand
or as
have you got to
David,
negotiate
Waldman
with?
might say, herder.
Yes, exactly. I mean, he's just been handed a list of strategies and policies, all of which absolutely must be in the bill, because the absence of any one of them costs him the critical vote, because there's only one.
Like George Santos.
And so now he heads to negotiations with no room whatsoever to make any concessions. Which
I'll say
is
this
to
about
say
George
it's not a
Santos. He's a
negotiation.
liar. He's a cheat. He doesn't belong in Congress. He's a grifter. But apparently he did do his homework and study Kristen cinema.
Oh, all right.
Because that's her
I didn't
playbook.
realize that was his homework. But, yeah, they could even go
I'll
shopping
hold out
together.
at the last minute, even though you didn't expect me to. So Marjorie Taylor Greene won't be the last vote. Matt Gaetz won't be the last vote. I will.
Yeah.
And I'll completely come out of, in this case, right field. And I'll give you something you didn't even think about, and it doesn't matter. The point is you need me, and I'm just making it clear that you need me.
Yeah, that's interesting. That would probably caught his colleagues by surprise, and they were like, "What do you mean?"
That's why it's the cinema
You're the
playbook.
guy. Yeah, it was really quite brilliant. Although I don't know, I guess if more people saw it coming because there's just fewer senators, and you can find those players a little easier in here, though. I mean, probably the Matt Gaetzes and Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world were like, what do you mean he's the guy with the leverage? You have no right. You just came out of nowhere. You're not even real. Your resume is fake. How dare you? And he's like, my whole life is how dare I?
Well, yeah, exactly.
Of course,
and
that's
George
all I do.
Santos and Donald Trump share a couple of traits, which are grifter traits. You have to understand what makes grifters successful.
I should
Okay?
start.
One is you
learning
have
this, yes.
absolutely no shame. And two, the hidden superpower
I'm all shame.
is they're really good at spotting your weakness and exploiting it.
Yeah.
And Santos saw McCarthy and said, this guy is so weak, I can take him. I can take him to
wow.
the bank.
I'll never make it in this Congress.
I won't take him to Silicon Valley Bank. I'll lose my money. But I'll take him to some other bank. I'll take him to J.P. Morgan.
Yeah. Although I could take him to that bank and then just wait underneath that bank with an open bag, and when all the money falls out, I'll catch it.
Yeah.
That's fine. All right. I don't
But,
think I can do
really,
this.
really interesting Washington thinking. So as far as media goes, and I think we have time in the 3 minutes to cover this small topic, and then
Yes,
we'll talk
now,
about Discovery
but
and
yes.
Disney and the swamp afterwards.
Okay.
So I don't know if you heard this, but Donald Trump wants to have a CNN town hall, and CNN was actively negotiating with him over this.
You're
Well, at the same
negotiating with
time, Donald
terrorists
Trump
again.
doesn't want traditional presidential debates and is trying to use his influence with the party to sabotage them. Those
Yes.
are the two big media stories, along with the third one, which is the fake news, really is fake news. Tucker Carlson's text that alarmed Fox leaders, says the New York Times, it's not how white men fight. The discovery of the text message contributed to a chain of events that ultimately led to Tucker Carlson's firing. And they go on to make the case that Tucker Carlson was alarmed about something or other. The attackers
Okay,
on
so
January
what?
6th, like him, were white, and he was upset because it was 3 against 1 beating somebody up. But then he went on to say, well, I hope they kill him. And so the idea
Who?
that,
What?
or
Oh
words
my
to that
God.
effect, and the idea that somehow or other Fox News only discovered last weekend that Tucker Carlson was a white nationalist, and therefore that's the reason they fired him, is so ludicrous. I don't understand how the Times published this, except I looked at one of the authors, and it was Jeremy Peters, and I said, okay, that's how they did it.
Oh, okay. Well,
Jeremy Peters, Michael Schmidt, and Jim Rutenberg. You really have to be incredibly naive to believe that that had anything to do with what Fox was doing.
Yeah, all right. Well, we've heard better theories, certainly.
Certainly. The text to a producer, Exhibit 276, a couple of weeks ago to Tucker Carlson, January 7th, 2021.
Is that important?
A couple of weeks ago, I was watching video of people fighting on the street in Washington. A group of Trump guys surrounded an Antifa kid, and started pounding the living crap out of him. It was 3 against 1. At least jumping a guy like that is dishonorable. Obviously, it's not how white men fight. Yet suddenly I found myself rooting for the mob. I really wanted them to hurt the kid. I could taste it. Then somewhere deep in my brain, an alarm went off. This isn't good for me. I'm becoming something I don't want to be. The Antifa creep is a human being. Much as I despise what he says, I shouldn't gloat over his suffering. I shouldn't be bothered by it. I should remember somewhere somebody probably loves this kid. And if I don't care about these things, if I reduce people to their politics, how am I better than he is? Somehow or other, the Times looked at this and said, it's not how white men fight, and that's why Fox fired him. I look at it and say, Tucker Carlson says, I'm starting to care about people. And Fox said, okay, you're fired.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is without saying it explicitly, he's starting to care about people. It made me think, it sounds like he listened in church or something. And then I remember the 2 articles, Matthew Rigdon's been sending us over and over again that imply that what Rupert was freaked out by was his religiosity.
Well, maybe they were worried that was going to become public.
Yeah.
Well, it's now public.
Okay. Well,
congratulations, Fox.
Okay. Right. Well, the trickle-down discovery. It works. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Tucker Carlson still fired. That's good news. Why he was fired, I don't know, but he is, so that's pretty good. And, stop looking the gift horse in the mouth. You may never understand why he was fired. If you understood why he was ever there, congratulations. If you can't understand exactly why he was fired, move on. So what? I mean, all the theories are fun. I don't mean you can't spend time discussing it, because we will, because they're fun things. But you may never know, and that's okay, just as long as he stays fired.
Mm. So this is a piece in the New Republic, TNR. CNN, WTF are you thinking having a Donald Trump town hall? The former president has been impeached twice, criminally indicted, and is under investigation for rape. Now he gets to be on prime time. Yes. Actually, that's a civil case, so Trump won't be spending any time in jail over that rape case. But there's a lot of fascinating stuff coming out of it, including the observation by Terry Canfield and Lisa Rubin and Joyce Vance and some of the excellent women attorneys who are following this, about how different it is than, for example, the atmosphere when this allegedly happened years and years ago, where women were encouraged to be silent about these things. And Terry Canfield over at Mastodon had a nice rant about the history of rape as a crime.
Okay.
Basically, it goes back to the fact that it's a property crime. And it goes to the heart of why Access Hollywood didn't sink Trump with MAGA folks. The short answer to that is they don't see it as a crime.
Yeah, probably.
Now, why don't they see it as a crime? It's not that they would like to be in that position, but basically rape was a property crime against that which you owned. Maybe the husband, maybe the slave owner.
The oldest of old days, yes.
But that's the history of rape as a crime. And so a modern interpretation is awkward because it's built on the foundation of weirdness to begin with.
Okay.
So, in other words, what do you have to prove in order to prove rape? Sometimes an allegation is enough. A testimony is enough. Ann Coulter was claiming that this is the only crime that people don't have to supply proof, just testimony, allegation. That's enough. And what they're really complaining about is it interferes with the patriarchal system of, the man is innocent until proven guilty. Because it's his property.
Under one.
I mean, go back to, is it possible for a husband to rape a wife?
And Donald Trump has availed himself of that defense in the past.
Yeah. So, just fascinating stuff that scratches the surface of what's going on in that trial. In the meantime, there are contemporaneous, she told me about it, testimonies at the trial, but also in a different case, Trump did this to me at the trial, establishing the atmosphere of somebody who, sure, you could believe he did this because look what he did to these other people. And it's really fascinating that was allowed.
Yes,
but
well,
it's certainly going
context.
to be one of the things that the jury's going to have to wrestle with.
Ordinarily, that's the sort of testimony and introduction of evidence that wouldn't be allowed. And here's where you can be happy about the fact that it's not a criminal case. In a criminal case, you wouldn't be able to introduce that sort of thing. But in the civil setting, it's easier to get past.
Yeah, in a civil setting, hearsay is
to get by
is
with.
part and
You
parcel
get it
of
in.
what you can talk about, but you can't do it in a criminal case.
Yeah. So, well, that's interesting.
How do I know
all by
that? I'm not a
itself.
lawyer, but I learned this from other Donald Trump trials.
He's on trial. He's in criminal settings. He's in civil settings all the time. So you just need to point
Letitia
to
James
him.
used this when she was dealing with the Trump organization.
Yeah. Okay. So establishing a pattern of behavior, not as easily permitted in a. There are ways to engineer it occasionally that will work if the circumstances are just right in a criminal trial. But all right, well that is interesting, and we have some peculiar institutions in this country to try to deal with, and get past some weird history. But
yeah, speaking of weird history, I don't know why I wind up speaking so much about the law, except that we're a nation of law. I'm not a lawyer.
Oh, that's it. You keep talking about this nation, and then if it turns out we're a nation of laws, eventually you're going to
Rule
have
of
to
law,
talk
that
about
sort
laws.
of thing. Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about discovery.
Okay, that's law.
And I'm not talking about the Discovery Channel.
Or the discovery of this country, which wasn't even a discovery.
Right.
Okay.
So what do we mean when we say discovery? Well, this is from the offices of the United States Attorneys, U.S. Department of Justice. I figured they would know something about it. Another important part of trial preparation is reading every report written about the case. So, in other words, if you want to be a judicious and competent prosecutor, is you got to know every single report. You got to know information from witnesses, and then you as the prosecutor have to determine the facts of the case. And that means that prosecutors must also provide the defendant copies of materials and evidence that the prosecution intends to use at trial. This process is called discovery, and continues from the time the case begins to the time of trial. It's a continuing obligation to provide the defendant documents and other information which may reflect upon the case, and a failure of a prosecutor to do so can expose the prosecutor to fine sanctions by the court, and this also includes a requirement that the prosecutor provide the defense with exculpatory evidence.
Yes.
So you can't suppress the fact that we knew the guy was innocent because we wanted a conviction. You're not allowed to do that.
Yes. I mean, when we say you can't do that, there are consequences when you do it, because people do this all the time.
Right.
It's bad. But
right. Why is this matter? Because Ron DeSantis had a problem with Disney. Ron DeSantis wanted to pass this don't say gay law.
Yeah.
And Disney had some mild objection to it.
Yeah.
And DeSantis flipped out.
Okay.
And here's a couple of threads that really talk about this. This is Texas legal attorney and professor Lee Kowarski, who, among other things, was interviewed by Greg Sargent. I have the Greg Sargent piece where it came from. But Lee Kowarski has a thread of his own on Twitter.
All right.
DeSantis Disney. As Greg Sargent explains, this case has legs. About a year ago, Disney leadership criticized the Don't Say Gay law in Florida. DeSantis went berserk and started trying to get lawmakers to push through a punitive response.
Yes.
That's where the Reedy Clique board switched hands from Disney to the Florida state by reconstituting the board.
Right.
The writing was on the wall, so Disney locked in contractually a bunch of land use agreements with the governance board that it still controlled at the time, and that was before DeSantis got the Florida legislator to give him power to reconstitute the board. When he reconstituted the board, he discovered these contractual lock-ins, and in response, he worked with the new board to have the board declare that Disney's agreements with the old board were void. Now, needless to say, this raises a lot of problems, including problems under the contracts clause, whatever that is. That's where I'm not a lawyer, and I had to look that up too.
The contracts clause.
The First Amendment, hat tip Citizens United, also violated. Comments of DeSantis lawmakers and the board make it fairly obvious this is all motivated because of Disney's opposition to the Don't Say Gay bill. That's legally problematic, so DeSantis and allies pivoted to an explanation about how this was some principled winding down to a sweetheart governance deal that Disney had with the state. Disney sued in federal court for a bunch of constitutional violations and actually got a good judge. So they're not dealing with Aileen Cannon. Mm-hmm. DeSantis is in trouble, and his allies know it, or they should. Per my comment in the Sargent article, this case is almost certainly going to get past summary judgment and get into discovery. And when they get into discovery, Disney's going to certainly get communication on the DeSantis side showing this was a viewpoint motivated, by revenge, essentially, which is going to be really bad for the state's legal position. The DeSantis people know this, and they know they got a bad draw with the federal judge, so they just voted to countersue in state court, and they're saying it's because Disney engaged in forum shopping, by which they mean they filed in federal court rather than state court. And they want to convince the state and federal courts to agree federal litigation should be stayed so the state litigation can go forward, but that's not going to happen because federal law gives plaintiffs the right to choose a federal versus state forum. And the fact that these are all federal constitutional claims, which is First Amendment rights, in other words, that's heavily against the idea that the federal court might hold back as a matter of discretion. So basically, everything coming out of DeSantis and the board, the new board, is bluster. And if I'm DeSantis's lawyers, having watched the Dominion litigation, I'm terrified what a drip of discovery during a presidential campaign looks like.
Yes.
It's just very, very bad for DeSantis.
Yeah. Well, it won't come out well. I mean, the issue here underlying the whole thing is, of course, that every Republican accusation is a confession. The problem with what DeSantis has done here is that it is an actual example of the weaponization of government. It's not the federal government. It was the state government that he weaponized, but he did so in a way that violated the federal rights of Disney. And, yes, it was forum shopping in the sense that they had the choice between filing in federal or state court, but, the Constitution has established a forum store, and they went to it and went shopping. It says it's up to you. If you have, if it rises beyond a certain value and there are federal claims at stake, you can choose to adjudicate your case in federal court. Sure, go ahead. So they did. I mean, that's just baloney. Not to mention the fact that, of course, Matthew Kaczmarek represents the ultimate forum shopping, right down to the level of judge shopping. So does Eileen Cannon. And it's absurd hypocrisy at an incredible level to be crying about that now. But
again, as you said, every accusation is a confession.
Yeah. What's happened here is he now realizes he'll be exposed for having weaponized government because somebody said something that I don't like a particular bill that this governor champions. We've got to, no, you just sit back and say, well, it's the law now, so deal with it. That's actually the prerogative of the power of government.
Yeah, but he's a vindictive little man.
Jerk.
And
yes.
So, he does this everywhere throughout Florida government, and that's why
right.
people in Florida are afraid of him.
And
if you work for a Florida state hospital, for example, doctors can't speak their mind about gun violence.
Right.
You'll get fired.
You will, but you will also now, thanks to Disney, which has the pockets to demonstrate this for everybody, realize, wow, I actually have a case and I can be the cause of all this discovery and I can show that I was victimized by a weaponized government and further damage.
Right, Disney can do it. Individual
Republicans
doctors can't, and I know
general,
doctors who have been silenced on that basis.
Right. And so there are conferences going on now, I'm sure, about... Well, maybe it's the American Medical Association or the Florida physicians, however they organize.
Even they don't have the deep pockets that Disney does.
They may not, but they may find friends like Disney itself, who says, you know what, would be great if there were other plaintiffs making this same claim at some point, and maybe there are people who can finance this. Yeah. I don't know. So, Republicans would find the money for it. That's for sure.
That they would. So David French had an interesting article.
Well,
in the New York Times, of all things, and a little history.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
What do you know about tow trucks?
Mater from Cars. What else?
To understand why Ron DeSantis should lose in his quest to punish Disney, and he goes on to say that doesn't mean he will lose because Supreme Court, but he should lose. Mm-hmm. To understand why DeSantis of Florida should lose in his quest to punish Disney for the high crime of publicly disagreeing with Ron DeSantis, it's first necessary to talk about tow trucks.
Oh, I am not sure about this. Okay, let's hear
All
it,
right.
David.
North Lake, Illinois, early 1990s.
Wrong.
The city had maintained a list of tow trucks, companies available for use by the police department. And the list was simple. You're on the list. You go down, you get the next one if you need a tow. You get the next one if you need a tow, and so on and so forth. And it worked fine.
So for like parking violations or something
until
like that? Okay.
One of the tow truck companies, John Graziano, owner of Huurh Truck Service.
No, not them.
Now, how a guy named Graziano winds up owning a Huurh Truck Service.
Hey, it's legitimate.
I don't know. Hey, why not? Right? So it's
what's wrong with you?
It's America.
Yeah.
Right? You got a problem with that? It's America.
He bought the company. I was so impressed.
Graziano declines to support the mayor and backs his opponent.
Yeah.
The mayor
is his
removes
right.
Graziano's company from the list.
As is maybe not his right.
Well, here's
but
the thing.
Let's see.
Okay?
Let's find
There's
out.
no right to be on the list.
That's true.
And once placed on it, the city's policy was to remove companies only for cause. Mm-hmm. So
you got to come up with a cause.
This raises the constitutional question of when the government's allowed to take away benefits it was never obligated to provide.
Mm-hmm.
Like public employment, for example. Right? If the government hires you, can they fire you for anything? No. What if they discriminate against you?
You want to tell me the answer to that one?
The answer is once the government hires you, you're subject to the same constitutional rights as everybody else. 7-2 decision from the Supreme Court.
Okay.
Anti-discrimination laws and constitutional principles prevent it from firing somebody because of race, sex, or religion, because that applies to everybody across the board in America.
Yes. Okay.
Even if you're a public employee.
And
even though the government, as your employer, can fire you for basically anything, but not something that's unconstitutional.
Yeah. This is where Donald Trump and others, depart. Where you should be able to do whatever you want if you're the top guy.
Right. So Anthony Kennedy, writing for the 7-2 majority, quoted case law and reaffirmed a clear constitutional principle. If the government could deny a benefit to a person because of his constitutionally protected speech or associations, you see the tie-in here with Disney.
Yes.
His exercise of those freedoms would in fact be penalized and inhibited, and such interference with constitutional rights is impermissible.
Right. It's the weaponization of government.
Right.
You can't weaponize
So
that.
there's
What's
case
wrong
law
with you,
on
weaponizer?
this. And that's why French says, you look at Disney has a pretty strong case.
Yeah. Not
least
today,
federal court.
weaponizer, to borrow a phrase. That
Right.
is
And then he goes on
appropriate
to say,
borrow.
well, the Supreme Court, nobody knows what they're going to do. But in theory, looking at this, that's why tow trucks mean Disney wins.
Okay.
Who knew?
Yeah. Well, I guess he did.
did.
But yes, right. I mean, a specific case that I was unaware of, but now we've learned something new. But yeah, essentially it comes right back down to it. Yeah. People like Donald Trump learned from, I don't know what, movies, television, just generally misunderstanding things or, whatever, finding themselves on the wrong end of the stick with something the government did that they actually did have the right to withhold from him. And he learned, the government can do whatever it wants. Why don't we use this thing? Why don't you just take away stuff from people you don't like and force them to either obey you or like you, whatever you can get out of them? And as it turns out, one, that's never been legal or constitutional, and it goes against the very foundations of our rule of law system of governance. But somehow he's actually instead raised a cadre of Republicans who say, yeah, that's actually what our country should be based on. Like whatever the powerful guy says goes. That's American. That's the truth, justice, and the American way. We should all run.
You sound like you're describing the rape trial.
Yeah. Well, in many ways, yes.
Well, what powerful men say, that
right.
should be what goes.
When you're a president, they let you do it.
So this is Bernie
Whatever it
Belvedere
is.
writing in Arc Digital, same topic, different angle. He says the DeSantis saga has caught people by surprise, and here's a thread that explains how it's both a genuine departure, but also entirely consistent with past forms of conservative activism against a major cultural entity.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
DeSantis versus Disney represents, for some reason I had a flashback to Anita Bryant, who promoted Florida orange juice and her crusade against gays. DeSantis versus Disney represents an escalation from past conservative crusades against cultural entities believed to be furthering a leftist agenda, and Disney has been boycotted before, so what's new? Mm-hmm. Well, here's what's the same. Waging cultural war against a cultural institution seen as too left-friendly. And here's what's new. The attack is being singularly perpetrated by a major Republican leader for the purpose of winning the presidency.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
For contrast, Ronald Reagan made it clear to the religious right that while he accepted their voter mobilization efforts, he would be prioritizing his economic vision above their interests. As I argued in my recent Bulwark Online piece, today, social conservatism, which in the past was a singular strand within the broader conservative movement, has become the all-consuming prerogative of Republican politics. So what makes today's iteration of Republican politics different than past forms is today's social conservatism isn't a branch of the tree or a tree within the forest. It's the forest.
Yeah. Okay.
So that makes it a little bit different. So I read all of this and said, to me, I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I don't specialize in this. I don't research this sort of thing.
You might want
but
to
to
go
me,
law school.
the fact of the matter is that Ron DeSantis is probably unhappy right now about all of this and thinks, you meddling kids. It would have worked except for Discovery.
Maybe. I mean.
So probably, I wrote, Alito and Thomas at this point are thinking, if we only got rid of Discovery, that would be much better for Republicans.
That's it. Right. Instead of Trump saying, we got to reform libel laws.
Well, I said
DeSantis
that,
can say.
and somebody sent me, one of our listeners, thank you very much,
Oh.
sent me this piece from Slate, dated December 6, 2018. 2 top conservative judges offer plan to end Discovery for most litigants.
No.
I started laughing. I said, wait a minute. I was just saying, no, they meant it. Last month, while a new crop of freshman House representatives were changing our vision of who belongs in Congress, Two high-ranking judges at a convention down the street shared their views about who deserves to be heard in federal court. Thomas Hardiman, judge on the Third Circuit, made what should have been viewed as a shocking declaration by a federal judge. Hardiman told the crowd at the 2018 Federalist Society convention, "If I were able to do something unilaterally, I would probably institute a new federal rule that said all cases worth less than $500,000 will be tried without any discovery." And the audience applauded. A fellow panelist,
well, it is
Judge Amal Thapar of the
but...
Sixth Circuit, chimed in, "Can I say amen?"
No, you can't. Actually, that's one thing you can't say.
Right?
Separation of church
This is
and
not
state.
an insignificant liberty these judges are seeking to curtail. But you go back and look, and it's got a price tag. Remember what I said about rape and property?
Uh-huh.
The key here is whether or not it's worth $500,000 or less. And their idea was they're trying to get rid of these nuisance suits.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can't have discovery, you're not going to bother people if it's not worth more than $500,000. So you have to put a price, and their price is $500,000, on things that are important enough for the federal government to pay attention to. And if you think it's outrageous, it is. And I'm saying, maybe it's not so outrageous that Thomas and Alito should think this, because it comes right out of the Federalist Society.
Yeah, well, they'll be instructed to think this now. And that's part of what the thing is. It's an idea factory.
Again, I'm not a lawyer, but the idea that, you can just get rid of discovery because, why?
Well, the why is different from a how, but I guess you could if you really didn't care about, fairness or anything like that. You keep saying you're not a lawyer. By the way, you now have time. You want to think about, UConn has a law school. Yeah. You want to go? You go at night? No? Okay. You might find it interesting, but then you could stop saying that if you wanted to.
No, I might get stuck in a study group with Ted Cruz.
That's true. But the pressure is so much lower when you're not really
also
looking to
torts.
Make a career out of it. Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that. And because what you're discussing, maybe we should get rid of discovery, happened in a slightly different form, I guess, like the tow truck story, in the 1980s, 90s, etc. And, there was a catchphrase for it that might ring a bell for everyone. Oh yeah, was that what that was about? Tort reform. The big tort reform push. We're going to have tort reform. And last time the big motivation was, I heard that somebody spilled coffee on themselves in McDonald's and they got $1 trillion, and that's baloney and we should get rid. And again, here, the concept at risk was the very basic concept that yes, trials in this country are decided by juries. You just pick regular people and you take 12 of them, or in some cases less if it's a civil case, etc.
Right, and then you spill McDonald's coffee on them and see how it feels.
And they say, "Oh my God, that is hot." You win the money. But
lawyers always make things so complicated. It's really very simple. You take 12 ordinary people, spill McDonald's coffee, and let them make a decision.
Right.
What's the problem?
Why they ought to do it that way. But then they said, you know what we gotta do in this country is we gotta stop trusting ordinary Americans to decide based on facts. We need to do something. We need to have what we'll call tort reform, so that no one will know what that means. But what it actually means is, instead of listening to ordinary Americans who sit and seriously weigh the facts as presented by both sides, let's do something different where only one side presents the facts. Or even if one side presents other facts, it doesn't matter because those are poor people. Things like that are how we should handle these. And everybody, it was very poorly received generally, but now they're back trying it again.
Ron DeSantis said, look, that's a stupid idea, but if you're going to do it, I'll be the guy that pours coffee on people. I like that.
And how about if I pour the coffee on you, and the new rule is we get to pour the coffee on you, but you don't get to tell the court how that feels? Wouldn't that be fair? And, most people say, what? No. And Ron DeSantis's backers say, here's $1.6 billion with which to say yes. And and then we'll have a bunch of conventions where we invite judges to, Kilauea Resort or whatever and say, you know what you should do? You should go back and say that the answer is actually, yes, it is fair. No more talking to judges or juries for regular people or if they're poor or yucky in some way.
Oh, and not only that, you have to declare that McDonald's is innocent because not all of the jurists screamed when you poured coffee on them.
Right. And the interesting thing here now is that DeSantis is essentially saying, you know who's really the jerk in all of this? McDonald's. And I think we should sue them out of existence too, by the way. I mean, he's turned against the corporate clients and all
that's
this.
That's why I thought it was so
Cardinal
interesting
sin.
that David Rothkopf wrote that Reaganomics is gone.
Yeah.
It is. Look at these people. Look at what they're doing.
That's right. I hadn't connected the two of those things. That's a good thought, too. You know, the death of Reaganomics, don't blame Democrats for the death of Reaganomics. I'd love to take credit for it. But with Republicans using government to sue giant corporations into submission, well, maybe that's, or maybe they ought to be thanking us, right? We're no longer going to do the trickle down economics by pouring money into the corporate coffers for them to do whatever they want, which means that they have less money to fight your lawsuits with. And maybe you should be happy about that. I don't know. But it touches on a lot of things here, but certainly Reaganomics is certainly dead as a concept among Republicans if they're suing the biggest corporate actors in the state because they might, oppose them politically. Jeez. All right. Well, lots of interesting points here to be made today. All right. Good.
So, interesting show, which is, by the way,
that's
over
the goal.
For me. It's 9:57, so we're about to hear the music.
Right.
And I'll be back tomorrow
got a minute
somehow
here.
try to make it interesting again.
Okay, right. And,
assuming it was interesting in the first place.
We think so. You could go to law school a little bit between now and then, probably, just a day's worth. I recommend torts.
Well, I got to go look up the what was that? The contracts clause? What the heck is that?
You know what? I mean, I don't know. I guess they're talking about the amounts in controversy.
It was in capital letters, so it must be important.
Yeah, but okay. I mean,
Article 1, Section 10 states that no state shall pass any law impairing the obligation of contracts.
I guess
that's the contract clause.
Yeah, I mean, it's so basic to the functioning of law and government in this country that it's actually not much talked about. I mean, of course, you sign a contract, you think you have an agreement, and basically, yes, you do, and no, the state shouldn't interfere with it and try to muscle their way into private agreements. And we all just sort of now assume, yeah, that's kind of the way it works. And it's so basic that it's also like offensive to hear about attempts to undo it. And yet here we are with people making attempts to undo it. You made a private agreement between two private actors. Well, the state should be able to muscle in and say, screw that, and you can't do it. And if we can't, well, then we need to make government stronger so that it can by weaponizing it. It's a bad idea. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Gosh, now I don't know what to do. There's a lot of things we could explore. I got some ideas about where we could head from this. There are segues to be made. I'm just checking in on all of my other inputs and sources and making sure no one's desperately trying to change the direction of the show. Oh, but I am reminded that Ian Reifowitz reached out the other day, and I gotta get back to him about seeing what he's doing over the summer and whether he might want to step in for an hour or so and tell us about, A, what he's been working on, and B, give us another angle of approach on the analysis of all the things that are happening. So we got to make that happen. Let's see. So other directions to go to. Wow. All right, there are 35 different ways to go, and I got to pick one. And we'll do this one. I got to scroll down and find it. There was a story over the weekend that deserves attention. I made brief mention, like in shorthand, of this secret code for people with long memories to Joan yesterday. And we winked about it, but now it's time to explain it. I had mentioned the Mercatus Center and the George Mason University School of Law. And because we were talking about all sorts of things, the Federalist Society, judicial retreats where the Federalist Society types somehow or another essentially, use brainwashing light in a certain way. to convince members of the federal judiciary to do things that ordinarily you would think, no, they're trained to do the opposite. Things like, hey, let's get rid of discovery, or hey, let's get rid of the influence of those stupid juries in personal injury cases or any other sort of tort cases. We'll have tort reform, where the one system that we have in our three-branch system of government, the one subsystem that's actually dependent on simply gathering a group of regular citizens and asking them what they think, we're supposed to that's supposed to be reflected in voting, but we've put 10,000 layers on that, and not only the Electoral College when we're dealing with electing a president, but the drawing of gerrymandered maps and voter roll purges and all sorts of barriers to entry to the game of voting make it so far removed from, hey, just tell us what you think, ladies and gentlemen, and every other possible combination of genders of the United States of America, but only a narrow slice of you, because a significant portion of you who are living here, make your home here, intend to stay here forever, etc., but had the disqualifying misfortune to be born in another country, can't vote for either forever or for some significant period of time, even though you're here paying taxes, living here under the laws, etc., and it's your intention to do so forever. Lots of other things that remove people from the voter pools. There was still at least the possibility that the outcome of a question of justice would still remain with regular people, and Republicans realized, regular people seem to hate us and the things that we want to do and the people that we champion. And so let's take them out of the equation. Similarly, that one didn't work, but here's another aspect. Everyone knows that the tort reform thing, now they know what that's about. That's a poison phrase, and we can't go that way anymore. There's still plenty of power left in it. They don't all actually realize what Republicans were trying to do there, but they feel like they lost on that front. Or maybe they just want to open a second front, which is to say, let's get rid of discovery so that trials take place with secret evidence instead. And one side, if it has lots and lots of money, can discover all sorts of cool things that will help them win at trial, and all of it will be complete surprises and therefore unrebuttable by the other side. But, we'll just say, discovery, that's bad. Most people don't know what that is. The fact that we're going to, quote unquote, reform it won't bother anybody because most people don't understand it. But you might as well say things like, let's have due process reform. People don't really quite understand what due process is, but, let's say, one of these drug dealers got off in court because instead of getting a search warrant to seize the evidence from their house, we just kicked the door in and beat them in the face with sticks. And everybody's in favor of beating drug dealers in the face with sticks. In fact, Donald Trump is about to run for re-election on the platform that they ought to be dragged out and murdered. And if, for instance, you go to the wrong house, as the cops sometimes do, or you're wrong about what the evidence shows, or you actually know you're wrong when you go there, but you're weaponizing government because the person you say is a drug dealer, and you're going to drag them out of the house and murder them, and everybody cheers because, yay, for killing drug dealers, but was actually just somebody who didn't like your Don't Say Gay bill and said so out loud. And if you say that they're a drug dealer or that they have child porn on their computer or whatever, no one really wants to know whether or not it was true. They're just happy to see them killed. That sort of court reform. Like, you can't do that and still have an America, but that's what they're doing. Well, anyway, you might say to yourself, well, judges, though, haven't they gone to law school? They're lawyers, generally speaking, right? You don't have to be, but generally speaking, they are. And, like Greg says, I'm not a lawyer, but, and I don't play one on TV. These people do play them on TV. They have gone to law school, generally speaking. And they generally take all of what they were taught in, civics growing up and, things that they learned in law school. They take it fairly seriously. And to date, it's still the case that the majority of them have been taught that things like fairness are important, and everybody having equal access to the evidence so that you can weigh it, and having a system of zealous advocacy on both sides, and trying to, at least level the playing field in court in front of the jury such that the strict facts and arguments can be made from both sides, and the jury can decide even in these complicated cases, and that that juries would be the ones to make those decisions. All these fundamental principles of law, they still take seriously because, they went to a school that says these are serious. What if we change their minds? Well, it might not be all that easy to change their minds about fundamental issues of justice, truth, justice, and the American way. It's a very powerful phrasing, right? And it takes a lot to change people's minds. How would you do it? Well, there are a couple of approaches. And one of them, of course, is what if we had law schools that taught them something completely different? And these days they now do have such things. And two, what if it's too late? What if they're already judges? Well, one thing we could do is, of course, take them on junkets to beautiful resorts where we have continuing legal education seminars going on. And so therefore, it's paid for by work and it's pretty cool or whatever. Or we could get, if it's not considered, actual study of the law because it's actually studying the actual opposite of the law. Well, then what if conservative foundations paid for it? And you went and you were told that remember, you're a judge and it's actually pretty hard to stop you from doing more or less what you want, especially if the higher courts are also influenced by these conservative activist organizations, such that normally if you were to make a blatant mistake, like, okay, I've been convinced, I've been brainwashed by the Federalist Society, or however you want to express it, right? Discovery is stupid and we shouldn't have it. The judge was at least smart enough to say, well, if I could make this decision unilaterally, recognizing that he's not supposed to be able to make that decision unilaterally. And if he were to make that decision unilaterally, it's likely that he would be reversed on appeal. But that's the old system where the appeals court judges also cared about the stuff that they learned in law school and growing up as children about the nature of America and the nature of our judicial system. But what if they were taught that all that stuff was wrong and the founders really meant something completely different? I mean, you think it's crazy, but again, some real life examples. It wasn't until 2010 in now it's escaping my mind the name of the case, but the DC gun law case. Everybody knows what I'm talking about now, and they probably remember it, and I don't. But it wasn't until 2010 or so that Scalia, in writing the majority opinion on this case, actually said, there's a real live, always has been there, intention of the founders and everything, principle that you can go about in ordinary business, commerce, in society, armed all the time, because the Second Amendment is about the right to self-defense, personal protection and self-defense. And it was always, prior to that, at least they paid some lip service to the idea of, well, there's this whole half of the Second Amendment that talks about militias and well-regulated this and that, and it's just there's this whole thing about it's supposed to be part of an armed, trained unit, not individuals. I mean, if there's one thing that you can still say is kind of the opposite of a militia, it's one guy with guns. Now, militia is, the whole point of the militia is there's at least two of these guys with guns. It's a collection of people who drill as a unit, military style, in order to achieve the ends of the state in some way. Ordinarily in this sense, the protection against foreign invasion or insurrection, or, as the Second Amendment weirdos would have it, well, what if the government itself is the problem and we need to overthrow it? That's, I guess, arguably within the rights that were contemplated by the founders at the Second Amendment. They were, of course, close to the situation where, the government was the source of tyranny. So it's arguable that they may have had that in mind. What they didn't leave any record behind on is the idea that, well, what if you're just one person? And what if the tyranny you're thinking of is, I don't like that other guy, or that person makes me scared? That's tyranny, so I'll shoot him. And not really, there's just kind of zero evidence that was ever the case, but they just pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. And basically, people in America have always thought guns were pretty cool, and they were always taught. One thing they remembered from high school is the Constitution is really cool too, and it secures all sorts of weird freedoms that you didn't know about. And one of them is you can have one of these tactical weapons with you, and you can carry it around if you want to. And if you get judges to say, yeah, that is what they meant, all the way up the ladder to the Supreme Court, then it ends up being the case. And it wasn't for 200 and something years, but now it is. So why couldn't that happen with discovery? Why couldn't that happen with tort reform? It could. And it's the aim of these groups that it should. Well, this story came up over the weekend, which is interesting and informative all by itself. But remember all of, what we just discussed here and the context that I winked with Joan about yesterday, the context of the Mercatus Center. Now here, the Mercatus Center thing, gosh, how far back do you have to go to find out about the Mercatus Center and what was written about it on Daily Kos? Let's see. When was that treated? So it was years ago. Let me see if this will answer the question. I think, okay, we're talking about, I guess, man, it was years ago. Oh, yeah, there we go. Here's one of my own articles on it in December of 2006 that begins, the very first line of it is that nearly 2 years ago, so that would be 2004, we're really going way back, nearly 2 years ago, Chris Bowers issued an alert to the chiefs of staff of all Democratic members of Congress. I just want to put that out there just in terms of the time frame. And I think maybe it makes sense to now stop, go back to the article I wanted to read you, and then say, so what was this warning about that Chris Bowers issued in 2004, 2005? Okay, so just to keep you on the edge of the seat with that one, we now head over to the New York Times, and this is going to take us a while to get through. So I guess I better get started. How Scalia Law School, yes, Antonin Scalia Law School, became a key friend of the court. So this is a very far-ranging article and widespread tendrils in this one. What is Scalia Law School at all? In case you don't remember, George Mason University here in Virginia. George Mason University's law school cultivated ties to justices with generous pay and unusual perks. In turn, it gained prestige, donations, and influence. That's the subheader on this article. Scalia Law School is the new name of what was, for the first couple decades of his existence, simply the George Mason University School of Law. George Mason University, public university here in Virginia, Northern Virginia based, the GMUSL that I attended, I graduated from. And I went there knowing at the time that it was a bastion of conservative legal thought and of, in particular, the school of thought known as Law and Economics, that originally developed at the University of Chicago, but then transplanted here to GMUSL, which then became the Antonin Scalia School of Law, which they realized fairly quickly afterwards was ASSOL, and that doesn't look like a great acronym, and so they actually went back and changed it, and it's now like Antonin Scalia Law School, or something like that, ASLS, as opposed to ASSOL. They actually really honestly had to do that. But I think you might remember that. That's a fairly recent happening. So Steve Eder, E-D-E-R, is that right, the pronunciation? And Joe Becker together have put this piece together for the Times. Again, how Scalia Law School became a key friend of the court. What's the problem with being a friend of the court? Well, let them explain. In the fall of 2017, An administrator at George Mason University's law school circulated a confidential memo about a prospective hire. Just months earlier, you might recognize this guy's name, Neil M. Gorsuch, then a federal appeals court judge from Colorado. Well, he had just won confirmation to the Supreme Court seat left vacant by the death of Antonin Scalia, for whom the law school was named. Right? For President Donald Trump, bringing Judge Gorsuch to Washington was the first step toward fulfilling a campaign promise to cement the high court unassailably on the right. We all understand this. For the leaders of the law school, bringing the new justice to teach at Scalia law was a way to advance their own parallel ambition. Like, who wouldn't be impressed by having a Supreme Court justice teaching at your law school? And with George Mason University, again, being in Northern Virginia, this was a real possibility. They didn't have to go very far in order to teach a course at George Mason University School of Law. You're taking advantage of your proximity to Washington, D.C. Fair enough in that sense, but wait, there's more. And as it turns out, proximity appears in the end to have had very little to do with what was going on here. Establishing and building a strong relationship with Justice Gorsuch during his first full term on the bench could be a game-changing opportunity for Scalia law as it looks to accelerate its already meteoric rise, and I have problems with that phrase, but there it is, to the top rank of law schools in the United States, read this memo, contained in one of thousands of internal university emails obtained by the New York Times. So that's interesting all by itself, but there you go. An internal memo saying, yeah, this would be really good for us and our quote-unquote meteoric rise to the top ranks of law schools in the United States. And to the extent that that's true, I get to say, yeah, I went to one of the top law schools in the United States, but it's really not true. Anyway, by the winter of 2019, the law school faculty would include not just Justice Gorsuch, but also two other members of the court, Justices Clarence Thomas and Brett M. Kavanaugh, not Brett something else Kavanaugh, the right one, Brett M. Kavanaugh, all deployed as strategic assets in a campaign to make Scalia Law, a public school in the Virginia suburbs of Washington, a Yale or Harvard of conservative legal scholarship and influence. In other words, it's the, Hillsdale College, New College of Florida, / Patrick Henry College, / whatever else. Yeah, interesting. So, and by the way, the Yale or Harvard of conservative legal scholarship, Yale or Harvard has pretty good as conservative legal scholarship goes. You might say, I don't know. If you were looking for some indicator of whether or not that's really true, you might look, let's say, at the upper echelons of lawyers and in the United States and say, I don't know, the Supreme Court. How many of them are from Yale or Harvard? Oh, okay. And how many of them are from Yale or Harvard and are conservative legal scholars? Almost all of them, huh? Well, those of whom who are conservative anyway, but almost all still a product of Harvard, Yale, and they're littered all over Congress as well. We keep scratching our head. How is it that this idiot says they went to Harvard or Yale or Princeton and is still so, completely removed from 200 years of common understanding of what the law and Constitution are all about? Happens all the time. But there you go. To the extent that they believe it's true. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. I graduated from this law school. It's not Harvard. It's not Yale. Conservative or not. I mean, I guess the ranks of truly dedicated, outwardly conservative law schools are pretty small. So it's at the top of that list. It's just there's nobody else on that list. Anyway. That's not really the point of this article. The law school had long stood out for its rightward leanings and ties to conservative benefactors. Its renaming after Justice Scalia in 2016 was the result of a $30 million gift brokered by Leonard Leo, who was mentioned yesterday. Joan mentioned his name. I think you know who that is by now. Prime architect of a grand project then gathering force to transform the federal judiciary and further the legal imperatives of the right. An ascendant law school at George Mason would be part of that plan. Since the rebranding, The law school has developed an unusually expansive relationship with the justices of the High Court, welcoming them as teachers, but also as lecturers and special guests at school events. Scalia Law, in turn, has marketed that closeness with the justices as a unique draw to prospective students and donors, which is kind of what that would be the more harmless version of it as well, right? You're going to prospective students. Hey, you might cross paths with a Supreme Court justice. It could happen because they're here a lot. The Supreme Court assiduously, supposedly, seeks to keep its inner workings and the justices' lives shielded from view, even as recent revelations and ethical questions have brought calls for greater transparency. Yet, what emerges from the trove of documents is a glimpse behind the Supreme Court curtain, revealing one particular version of the favored treatment the justices often receive from those seeking to get closer to them. The documents show how Scalia Law has offered the justices a safe space in a polarized Washington, an academic cocoon filled with friends and former clerks where their legal views are celebrated. They are even given top pay and treated to teaching trips abroad, and their personal needs are anticipated, from lunch orders to, in Justice Gorsuch's case, house hunting. What? Why? When? And how about the legal teaching trips abroad? I thought the whole idea was we're right here. You don't have to go anywhere to teach. Well, that's great for the students, but is it really all that cool for the justices? Oh, I get in a car and drive from this part of Washington to this part of suburban Washington. I get to take the metro and then teach a class. Big whoop. What about if it was really more interesting for me? Never mind the students. Well, we're getting to that. By law, justices may earn outside income from a limited number of sources: book advances and royalties, investments, billionaires buying their mom's houses, I guess, and teaching. That's actually outside the law. That's supposed to be one of the things that they can't take. The Judicial Code of Conduct specifically encourages teaching, as a matter of fact, encourages it. So naturally, the conservatives have said, aha, that's the one we can exploit. We can do this one. Teaching. Under the cover of teaching, we can do almost anything because they're encouraging teaching. Watch this. Many justices have augmented their government salaries, which now hover beneath $300,000. Beneath $300,000, my word. By holding classes at schools, including Harvard, Duke, and Notre Dame, which we call Notre Dame. But Scalia Law quickly moved to the front of the line, in part because of its proximity? No. Because of political connections? No. But by offering generous benefits. Ready? For teaching summer courses that generally ran up to 2 whole weeks, Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh each made salaries that approached the legal cap on certain outside income, roughly $30,000 in recent years. So, a healthy raise, 10%. There's a cap, but they go right up to the cap. Coincidentally, we'll pay $1 less than the cap. Okay. The school also creates bespoke programs for the justices in far-flung locations. Come to Northern Virginia, you'll have close proximity and therefore access to the Supreme Court. Unless, of course, the Supreme Court demands to be flown elsewhere in order to teach these courses, in which case proximity has nothing to do with it except that they're close to an airport, and you might use the same airport to fly your sorry ass across the globe to go attend this course, as many impoverished students will want to do, I am sure. Or maybe wealthy benefactors will go in your stead and they'll take the course. And not even a law school student will be able to take this course. Or maybe they'll sponsor you to take the course as well, so that it looks like there's some young people in there and they're really teaching students. Again, ready? So, the school creates bespoke programs for justices in far-flung locations. Justice Gorsuch has traveled to Iceland, because it's nice, and Italy, because it's nice too. Why? He's teaching there because, of course, where is he teaching? George Mason University, or that is to say, Scalia Law School. Where's Scalia Law School? Arlington, Virginia. Where's the class? Italy, Iceland, whatever. Oh, but it's study abroad. Well, that's something you do as an undergraduate. Well, we do it as graduate students. That's what we like. Justice Kavanaugh has taught in Britain because he doesn't like when people don't speak English around him, I guess. During the first pandemic summer, when the rest of us were staying home, both justices pressed on with their classes, teaching at stateside resorts. Only Justice Thomas, this is interesting for his choice. I guess he's just a homebody in this one. Only Justice Thomas has routinely held his classes on campus with two of his former clerks as co-professors, which actually sounds fairly normal, but, has implications later on as well. But out of all of them, he's the only one who said, but I can teach classes with real students on your campus. You're very close, right? Why don't I just do that? Okay. I mean, if you don't like to travel, that's fine. No, I do like to travel. I just like to make sure that my travel is paid for by Harlan Crow. Or I don't actually need you to arrange all of this fancy travel stuff for me, and quote unquote, so I can teach. It's not a bribe, it's teaching, right? I don't need that because I'm getting actual bribes with actually better, cooler travel from this billionaire. So I'll just teach on your campus. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kgrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kgrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm going to continue with this new development in Supreme Court ethics about the thin cover that they use for what could be thought of as essentially bribery of yet more Supreme Court justices. But don't accuse the Republicans of all the wrongdoing just yet because, well, what about one who was appointed by a Democratic president who might have involved herself in similar activity? There's the cover story, all they need. Even the liberal blank, blank, blank does this as well. What's happening here? A better, closer examination. There's more to come, more details that you need to find out about what exactly is going on, right? Okay, so the essential setup here is, what if George Mason University School of Law, the Antonin Scalia Law School, set it up so that Supreme Court justices could teach courses because, of course, the judicial ethics rules say, well, we actually encourage outside income to the extent that it is earned from teaching because you have a lot to teach people, so you might as well do it. Education is a great thing. Go do it. Okay, fine. Education, you mean like going to a law school nearby and teaching students at night after I do all that? That sounds actually kind of boring, although Clarence Thomas might be into it. What about if it was made a lot cooler? Then I would maybe consider doing it, and it would hold that much more benefit. So what are we talking about? When a justice is with us, we do everything we can to engage the justice with our students, the law school's dean, Ken Randall, said in a statement. That sounds right. Okay. He added, law schools serve students, and their education is undoubtedly enhanced by the justices teaching or visiting or speaking with students. I mean, it's hard to argue with it, right? At times, the justices' teaching has intersected with their positions on the court. Justices Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Thomas regularly used employees of their chambers. What do they mean by that? As their teaching has intersected with their position on the court. Yeah, sure. You mean it's happening at the same time? No, I mean something slightly different. Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Thomas regularly used employees in their chambers, right? Their official staffs for, you get this staff paid for in order to do your work as a justice. make sure you get all the briefs, and when you need to schedule meetings with the other justices to discuss important court business, they'll help you take care of that sort of thing, right? What if you used, though, those employees to do some other stuff, like coordinate your outside academic duties? Well, what if you did do that? I want you to arrange for me the transportation back and forth for me to teach this class, for instance. All right, well, it's in Northern Virginia. That's not such a big deal. That's probably okay, right? Just coordinating a ride for you between Washington, D.C. and Arlington, Virginia. Well, is it okay? Because apparently there's a judicial advisory opinion which the justices say they voluntarily follow, and they have to follow it voluntarily because, of course, judicial advisory opinions, well, first of all, they might not be generally applicable with the force of law anyway because they're advisory opinions, but the Supreme Court says, well, all this stuff applies to all the rest of the federal judiciary, just not us, because of this whole thing where we have three branches and we're the Supreme Court and there's no appeal from us, and we hold that there is no code of ethics for us necessarily. And even if there is, if we break it, what are you going to do? Put us in jail? We're the Supreme Court. We are going to overrule all of that other stuff and say you can't do that to us. Well, anyway, but they say they voluntarily follow it. And that opinion says staff members, like the ones we're talking about, should not help in performing activities for which extra compensation is to be received. So yeah, it's only a ride from here to Arlington, Virginia, if you're Clarence Thomas and you're teaching over at the campus. But asking me to arrange it, whether that's call an Uber, call a limo, whatever it is, asking me to make sure that there's a Chipotle order for me waiting because, I'm teaching at night and I go directly from work here at the court over to the law school and I don't get a chance to eat. All right, fair enough. You got to eat, right? But should you be using federal court employees to arrange that? No, you should not. How do we know where the line is drawn? Well, are you being paid for this class? Yes. Then no, they can't do that. Somebody else has got to do that. You're being paid $30,000. Out of that $30,000, find somebody else to order you something from Chipotle and bring it to you. Maybe the school staff will do it. They probably will, and they'll probably do it for free, and you get to keep all $30,000. Just ask them. Well, I prefer to ask my guy. Well, that's actually wrong. Well, but I'm the Supreme Court, so screw you. So they do it. But that's not what the corruption is about. There's more. And in a number of instances, the article continues, the justices' co-professors filed amicus briefs trying to sway the court on pending cases, the records show. Well, that sounds actually more serious than using the staff at the Supreme Court. Slightly more serious. It can have more impact. Again, remember, my former clerks have become professors at the George Mason University School of Law, the Antonin Scalia School of Law, and they're teaching there, and we're co-teaching this class on the Constitution now. Right? Okay, great. Well, at the same time, what does co-teaching mean? It might mean anything from I got paid $30,000 to teach this class, but I'm not feeling it today or for the next 6 weeks. Why don't you, my former clerk, teach the class? Do me that favor, would you? Sure, no problem. Great, that's excellent. I'm making $30,000 on it, but I'm tired of teaching things. You teach it. Do me that favor, would you? Yes, sure, no problem. By the way, unrelated to my doing you that favor and landing that $30,000 in your pocket for a no-show job, I've written this thing. Would you take a look at it? It's actually an amicus brief about a case that's pending before you on the Supreme Court. Here's how I think this case should come out. In case, you feel any obligation to me for any reason, whether it's just you like me as I'm a former clerk of yours, or I made it possible for you to get $30,000 for a no-show job. Whatever. Would you take a look at it? Sure. Now, a spokeswoman for the Supreme Court declined to comment for this article. Some of the records reviewed by the Times were obtained through a public records request, which the university fulfilled only after the court was allowed to review the documents. Many of them were held back or arrived heavily redacted. That sounds weird. In a statement, Scalia Law said the courts had been consulted for security reasons. In addition, the Times examined records obtained years ago by the activist group Uncoke My Campus, Uncoke K-O-C-H, the Koch brothers, Uncoke My Campus, which, itself was a great idea. Not that dissimilar from something that I had thought to start many years ago, not as an organization, but as a project of just pointing out to people how many Koch-related foundations, allegedly nonprofit, tax-exempt, and therefore apolitical, supposedly, philanthropic organizations endowed professorships and chairs at various universities and, making, at least ostensibly these professors beholden to funding from right-leaning organizations that pretended to have nonpartisan arms. But anyway, that's another branch of examination that we could spend more time on another day. By any number of metrics, Scalia law's closeness to the justices has coincided with a striking upswing in its fundraising and its academic standing. The numbers of graduates receiving prestigious clerkships has steadily increased. And again, I remind you that there's really nothing about George Mason University. It's a nice place. I'm glad it was there for me to, achieve, to get a law degree, at public university in-state prices. And they do teach regular, law stuff that everybody has to know, even though all of that is changing and some of that is their doing. But the idea that it was super prestigious, to the level where you would get prestigious clerkships in the federal government, not really. That wasn't really a thing until very recently when this weird relationship developed. So the number of graduates receiving prestigious clerkships has steadily increased, and that has helped the school attract higher caliber students. That's a regular academic recruiting program to some extent, but I don't know, the rise has been somewhat meteoric, as it turns out, even though meteors are generally falling when we take note of them. Anyway, Scalia law is now tied for 30th place. That's not super impressive, but it's better than where they started. 30th place in the U.S. News and World Report rankings, a big jump in a relatively short time. In the process, it has become something of a hub of conservative legal thought, as we've told you in the past, and legal society in the capital. Scalia law has hit its stride in part by capitalizing on the conservative outcry against, quote, woke elite institutions of higher education. Why, those rotten Harvards and Yales, to which we all attended. Having a robust conservative alternative like Scalia law, quote, adds to the debate, said the still alive C. Boyden Gray, a major donor to the school who held senior positions in both Bush administrations. It is very healthy, he says by way of giving a cover story. Yet, to a lesser degree, the school has also been able to entice the court's liberals. Justice Elena Kagan, for instance, who has called for the court's conservative and liberal wings to rediscover common ground, joined Justice Gorsuch as a distinguished guest when he taught his summer course in Iceland in 2021. Justice Sonia Sotomayor spoke on a Scalia law panel with him the same year, though I'm not certain whether it was in Iceland or at the campus in Arlington. In late 2019, Justice Kagan emailed a George Mason professor who had clerked for Justice Thomas. George Mason, she wrote, seems a really good place to be. And it does, and you'll see exactly why. But first, so the fact that they've involved even the liberal justices in something like this comes into it as cover story, and we'll explain the relationship to the Mercatus Center thing, perhaps, if we can get to that later on in the broadcast, or maybe later in the week if we don't get to it. So, okay, there, now you know that Kagan went to Iceland on this thing, and that Sotomayor did something on a panel with Gorsuch, though it's unclear so far where that panel took place. Was there a junket to another country, or was it just a ride to Arlington? Anyway, Or maybe sometimes, of course, they would hold those panels in D.C. for the convenience of the justices occasionally. And it's not much to ask that students spending their time in Arlington make their way into D.C. for such a prestigious gathering. Justice Gorsuch may have felt the same way when the law school, that it seems a really good place to be, may have felt the same way when the law school, courting him in 2017, asked him to help choose the Italian city where, for 2 weeks the following summer, he would co-teach a seminar on national security and the separation of powers. A memo offered options, and I'll read the rest of the sentence in a second. So again, here the setup is, you're going to teach for us. Yes. Okay. Too boring to do it in Arlington, Virginia. What if we just said, let's pretend George Mason University School of Law has a campus in, where do you want to go? Italy, Iceland, England. Like, what would you like to do this summer? I want to take a fantastic international trip to some place, rich with natural beauty. Okay. Suppose we paid you $30,000 to do that and covered all the rest of the expenses of doing it as well. So you make a $30,000 profit in doing so. That would be awesome. How would that work? You would be teaching a class, co-teaching a class anyway. And, that's encouraged by the ethics code. So, you're on firm ground there. We'd pay you the legal cap, no more than that, because then we'd have trouble. But we'll give you everything that you're entitled to take, and you kind of co-teach a thing. And I'll tell you what, you pick wherever you want to go. Well, where do you have campuses? Doesn't matter. Where do you want to go? We'll make a campus for 2 weeks, and we'll rent buildings and say we have a campus there. And you go teach. What do you say? Wow. Okay. I guess I'd do it too, except it's really shouldn't you have said to yourself, this is one of those things, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Maybe you heard that. Maybe even in law school, maybe even before law school, you heard that. But then you realize, it might be too good to be true, but who's going to punish me? I'm unreviewable. Let's do this thing. So in 2017, he gets this memo. Choose where the following summer you would like to teach this course. Co-teach, thank you, a course. Would it be in the Italian city of, I guess he said, I want to go to Italy. All right, where do you want to go? Padua? Is that how you pronounce that? Padua? I don't have no idea. It's a first-tier city in a picturesque setting. You like picturesque, don't you? What about Venice with its 7-mile-long sandbar known as Lido? I mean, like Venice. I'm like, oh yeah, the place with the canals. Yes, but it also has a beach. Wouldn't you like to go to Lido Beach? Oh yeah, right. Important, right. Oh, or Bologna, Italy's most prestigious academic city. Like if you want to actually focus on the academics. And the answer was, well, no, I actually would rather be in the first-tier city with the picturesque setting, Padua, I don't know, I'm not Italian. In the end, that's where the class would be. That's where the law school put up the justice and his family in what a listing described as an, quote, aristocratic, antique-filled apartment in the heart of the old town. He's got to stay somewhere, right? And he's not paying for it. You are, because you're the one employing me. You're the one who said, I got to go to Italy. You put up the money for a house. A draft handbook for the trip, emailed to Justice Gorsuch, made clear that his teaching responsibilities, he's co-teaching, right? They would be limited to the mornings, leaving plenty of time for excursions, including planned visits to Bologna, which you chose not to base your course in, and Florence. Fantastico, the justice responded. Of course, fantastico. Free 2-week trip to Italy with tours and picturesque settings in a beautiful apartment, all paid for. Plus I get $30,000 and all I got to do is show up in the morning and say, national security is like totally constitutionally important and stuff. Joe, why don't you take it from here? I got to go to Florence. Pretty sweet, right? And it would be a terrible example of Republican corruption if it weren't for the fact that they also managed to rope in some Democratic president appointees in doing the same thing. But first, a little more description of what's going on here. A bridge to the court, they call this section. The rebranding as Antonin Scalia Law School became official on July 1st, 2016. Right away, the dean at the time, Henry Butler, began sending out save the dates for a dedication. At the top of his mind, ensuring that justices would be there. Got to have an A guest list, right? The plan was for a day of celebrations in October, framed as a non-ideological tribute to a justice beloved by his colleagues on both the right and left. The renaming announcement quoted Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg praising her close friend as, quote, a law teacher, public servant, legal commentator, and jurist non-pareil. I don't know how my French pronunciation is looking there, but I think you know the phrase I'm speaking of. But there was another aim, to raise money, that's always an aim for schools in general, with the justices as a draw. Okay. Justices Thomas and Ginsburg were to speak at a banquet in Washington's historic Union Station, not on the campus, but in D.C. According to a seating chart, there would be tables named for the justices assigned to them. Justice Thomas, to be seated with Mr. Leo, by the way. Justice Samuel Alito, seating with Dick Cheney. And Justice Ginsburg with then Judge Kavanaugh, of all combinations. The Koch Foundation, the Charles Koch Foundation, as a matter of fact, was listed in the program as a $100,000 platinum sponsor. And the law firms Kirkland and Ellis and Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher were among those with $50,000 gold packages. And maybe they were even encouraged to do so by Chief Justice Roberts' wife. I don't know. That mixing of the justices and the law school's fundraising brought a last-minute inquiry from the Supreme Court's Public Information Office. The court, according to an email to the dean from one of the school's event planners, said it could not, quote, clear the program without confirmation that the dinner was, quote, not a fundraiser, because Supreme Court justices cannot be involved in any fundraising activities. Ultimately, Justices Ginsburg and Thomas did not speak, though both attended. Damn, this thing has to be a lot of work, the dean wrote to Mr. Leo, then the executive vice president of the Federalist Society, the conservative legal organization, and a co-chairman of the dinner. But it is huge for Scalia Law, much bigger than the money. Mr. Butler, who retired as dean in 2020, referred questions for this article to Scalia Law. You answer them. I'm done answering questions. The school said it could not answer them since they related to Mr. Butler's tenure. How do you like that catch-22? The law school, established at George Mason only in the late 1970s, had carved out a distinctive place on the right flank of legal academia, its Law and Economics Center, devoted to one of the pillars of conservative legal thought, the idea that courts must consider the economic impact of the law, had offered training to more than 5,000 federal and state judges. Among the school's most prominent alumni, me, but also, indeed, its only Supreme Court clerk, was William Consovoy, who had helped persuade the High Court to strike down key provisions of the Voting Rights Act, of all goddamn things for them to strike down. And let me tell you, I mean, I'm sure it's nice, it's prestigious for George Mason. I ordinarily, as an alum, should be happy that happened, but George Mason University, if you believe that the courts clerks really need to come from the best and brightest and the top schools. I mean, a lot of people dispute that, and it's good to reach out, and differentiate and or diversity, in terms of their legal training. And not all, it's unfair that they come from all the elite law schools, but that's kind of the way it's been. And, in that sense, there was just really no business reaching down to GMU for that one. But okay, they did. There's an argument for that being a good idea. For all that, a year after Mr. Butler took over as dean in 2015, the law school's U.S. News ranking dropped to 45th. Falling out of the top 50, administrators wrote, would be a disaster from which the law school would have a very difficult time recovering. So now we have a mission. By then, Mr. Butler had turned to Mr. Leo for help. He was a rising power in the conservative ecosphere, helping to steer money to advance the Federalist Society's mission of filling the courts with judges who would interpret the Constitution according to the founders' intentions. In September of 2015, the dean sent Mr. Leo a 5-year plan, rooted in their shared belief that opportunity and a deep well of donor money lay in doubling down on the law school's efforts to become an alternative to the left-leaning institutions that ruled the rankings. Scalia law, Leo wrote in response to questions from the Times, is a model for what legal education should be in our country, grounded in objective analysis and truth-seeking, respect for the Constitution, and civility and balanced dialogue. Respect for the Constitution, except to the extent that they say, well, maybe we should get rid of the jury system when it comes to torts. Maybe we should get rid of discovery when it means conservatives lose or get embarrassed in court. Maybe we should just do away with all sorts of things that get in the way, or invent new rights that don't exist because rich people would like to have them, or crazy people would like to have them in the case of guns. All right. So there's lots more to this article that I definitely won't get to. And you should definitely read it. But, maybe we'll return to it as a theme because it is pretty astonishing. They really are exceptionally clever at finding ways around, the laws that are set up to try to prevent people from being able to bribe Supreme Court justices. It's just, they find the loopholes and they exploit the hell out of them, right up to the point of saying, well, what do you want to do for the summer? We'll just arrange your travel for you. Then we'll call it co-teaching, give you $30,000, pay all your expenses. And then maybe when our professors write amicus briefs, you'll consider them, you just be fair. Hey, keep it fair, keep it fair. Hey, I'm just going to borrow that line, right, as you're handing the guy the bribe. So at this point, I wanted to skip back and say, all right, so, well, what about the fact that Kagan went on one of these trips? I don't know how they treated her on it. Maybe it's detailed in the article. I don't know if she got the fabulous apartment or not, but whatever. She got the opportunity to go overseas and spend some time in Iceland, and that's great, and everyone should do that. But why is it cover? And why did I mention the Mercatus Center? So now I jump back to the piece I wrote in 2006. The Mercatus Center strikes again. Fox question mark on that one. And I mentioned that nearly 2 years ago, Chris Bowers had written about this Mercatus Center and issued an alert to the chiefs of staff of all Democratic members of Congress. And he said at that point, "My name is Chris Bowers," and it was true even then. "I write for mydd.com," way back when that was the case. "And I live in Philadelphia. I want you, and doesn't anymore, right? And I want you to know how concerned I am about an upcoming event that all Senate and House chief Democratic staffs have been invited to attend. The 2005 Chief of Staff Retreat, because we invite everybody, and it's for chiefs of staff, right? It's bipartisan. The Chiefs of Staff Retreat, hosted by the Mercatus Center, to be held February 4th and 5th at, of course, the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm writing this to urge you not to attend this event. And why wouldn't I? It is important that you realize who funds the Mercatus Center before you take their money and their trip, right? Since 1985, the Mercatus Center has received 513 grants totaling $45.3 million. Their top donors have been as follows, and it attaches the amount of money, and everybody gives a significant amount of money, but the Koch family, including the Claude Lamb Foundation, which is under their control, over $24 million. The Olin Foundation, $7.5 million. The Scaife family, including the Carthage Foundation, $5 million. The Bradley Foundation, $2.5 million. Is it Barry? B-A-R-R-E, Barry Seed, $2.2 million. And by the way, I don't know, I'm sorry if I mispronounced the guy's name, but I actually jumped out of the Times article about a paragraph or two before they actually mention his name as being involved in all of this too. So there's any number of other foundations, some of which you may have heard of, some of which you may not have heard of. Smith Richardson, McKenna, the Earhart Foundation, Jacqueline Hume Foundation, JM Foundation, Castle Rock Foundation, the Coors family, the Walton family, all giving substantial amounts of money to the Mercatus Center. And that really would have been the result. This is where the Uncoke My Campus thing would have come into. All of those foundations are extremely active in doing exactly what the Kochs did, funding and endowing chairs and professorships at universities across the country. Now, Chris goes on to say 9 of these 12 are the top 9 donors to the conservative think tank apparatus. The other 3 are, quote, conservative angel Barry Seed, big-time conservative donor Jacqueline Hume, and the Walton family of Walmart infamy. Together, these 12 sources of funding make up over 95% of the Mercatus Center's funding since it was founded in 1985. Several of the smaller donors not listed here are also uber conservative angels. Chris had a great point. Mercatus calls its retreat bipartisan because the chiefs of staff of both Democratic and Republican members are invited, but does the sponsorship of the event and the scholarship presented reveal a different picture? Well, you might wonder about that, but of course it did. In other words, although the invitations are distributed on a bipartisan basis, is the material presented actually bipartisan as the guest list is? At the time that Chris issued his appeal, I had looked into just who was attending these events on behalf of Democratic bosses, and this is what I found. I edited it down, but there was a list here of, I would say maybe 24 to 30 Democratic chiefs of staff serving Democratic members of Congress at the time who attended these events, and who knows what they were being instructed in. At the time the list was compiled, the Mercatus Center controversy also turned up in the then ongoing race for the DNC chairmanship, for which former Congressman and 9/11 Commissioner Tim Romer was the Democratic congressional leadership-backed candidate. Chris's point, of course, was that though the retreat was billed as bipartisan because of the way the invitations were distributed and accepted, the information imparted there, given the sponsorship of Mercatus, might be far from it. But, of course, they had every cover in the world. Well, okay, sure, maybe it's a junket. Okay, sure, maybe it's conservative indoctrination. But even liberal XYZ went there. Well, they've just Mercatus-centered Justice Kagan as well, and now they can say, well, it's not a Republican problem. Even the liberal Justice Kagan went on these trips. So, they're running the same playbook as always.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, there's a lot more to it, of course, and it's a lot more complicated than that. But now it's time to turn to other complicated and maybe even some simple matters. Justice Putnam will take you through them all on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy right here on Netroots Radio. Coming up next, including, well, let's see. Democrats have a legislative secret agent to fight the GOP on the debt ceiling crisis. Let's find out who.